Would you trust someone who makes a promise? He has the power to keep his promise, but he doesn't keep his promise? Stay tuned for more tonight on Polygamy. What love is this? She was born into polygamy. Her family followed the teachings of Joseph Smith. All of them, including plural marriage, especially plural marriage. Like many young girls, she had been promised to a man who was her father's age. But she fled. She ran away. She preferred an eternity of outer darkness to a life of polygamy. She chose hell over religious enslavement. That girl was me. After I fled, I thought I was free, but I realized I wasn't free. I was lost, alone, desolate. No home, no hope, no life. Then Jesus Christ found me and rescued me, and He loved me. In His love, I found real freedom, a real home, a real life. And Jesus offers you the very same thing. He is a shield to all who will take refuge in Him. He has been a refuge for me, and He can be for you too. Knowing the surpassing love of Jesus Christ today, this is why I can look back and ask, polygamy, what love is this? We welcome you to our show tonight. This is Polygamy, What Love Is This? And I am your host, Doris Hanson. I'd like to mention right off that our support group, our discussion group that we hold monthly for those whose lives has been touched by polygamy in any way is going to be next Monday evening at 6:30. If you're interested in coming, we'd love to have you join us. You can email us or call us for information. And we have some very good discussions. You can either join in by just listening or join in by participating with your story, but we'd love to have you come. So give us a call and we'll let you know the details. And you know, we are still looking for a place to house an escapee from the FLDS polygamy group. A woman with 6 children needs a place to live. Now, we know that there are people out there who could be looking for a tax deduction, that could donate perhaps a rental unit or a home that she could use for the duration of her needs and then write it off as a tax deduction. We also know that there's people out there who could donate repossessed homes or foreclosures or property which we could convert to funds that would provide housing for those who finally manage to escape a polygamy group, but they find it very difficult to integrate into mainstream society because of lack of resources. So we're asking for your help in locating these desperately needed resources. You know, having been born and raised in a polygamy group, I was taught all the doctrine of early Mormonism, which included the Mormon Articles of Faith. We were taught that the Bible is not a faithful book of God's Word, that it has been misused, abused, mistranslated, and corrupted. We were taught that the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith was God's answer to the corruption of the biblical record. The same doctrine continues to be taught in all the Mormon-based polygamy groups and the mainline Mormon church itself. In short, their dogma claims that the Bible is not reliable because it hasn't been translated correctly and that some passages have actually been removed. For example, the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, page 327, says, and I quote, "Ignorant translators, careless transcribers, or designing and corrupt priests have committed many errors." End quote. Another example is by Bruce R. McConkie in a speech that he gave at BYU in August of 1984. And part of what he said, quote, "The Bible abounds in errors and mistranslations," end quote. You know, there are scores upon scores of remarks made by Mormons and by polygamists denouncing the reliability of our Bible. Because the Mormon Church has made these charges of biblical corruption, which brings violence against God's character, we are devoting this show to answering the accusations of biblical inaccuracy and whether God was true to His promise. And God did promise that His word would never fail. Isaiah chapter 40 verse 8 says, "The grass withers, the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever." And His word has endured. It has never failed. Not for 1 second, not for 1 minute, not for 1800 years. God is faithful to His word. Our guest tonight to bring his expertise to the question is Pastor Jim Catlin. He's been our guest several times in the past. In fact, last March 10th in 2011, he presented some very valuable information questioning the veracity of the origins of the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenant. You may want to go to our website, whatloveisthis.tv, and watch that particular show. It's very informative. So now I would like to introduce and welcome back to our show, Pastor Jim Catlin. Thanks for joining us.
Expertise is a big thing to put on my shoulders tonight. This is great. I will look forward to this.
Well, I think that you'll convince a lot of people that you've got some expertise in this.
I hope we can bring up some stuff a lot of people don't know, because it's an easy charge to make that the Bible has problems, but when you look at it, it may not have as many as you think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what we want to do. You know, I got an email not too long ago, and it fit right in with the show. It's a short one, so I thought I would read it to kind of launch our discussion. The viewer wrote, "Dear Doris, you were commenting that the LDS Church believes the Bible is true as far as it's translated correctly. The Bible we have today is a copy of a copy of a copy, etc. We do not have the original documents. Do you think there may be a possibility that something was not translated correctly along the line? One word translated incorrectly can change the whole meaning of a sentence. Maybe that is why the LDS Church says that the Bible is not trustworthy." You know, they can say something all day long, but how about some proof? You know, the LDS Church has never come up with a shred of academic proof to back up their slanderous claims against God's Word, and that's our focus tonight.
That's right.
So tell us, why is it important to determine the reliability of the Bible?
Well, you know, the Bible has an extraordinarily important message, and that message is founded on where it actually getting signals, how it actually comes from, where it comes from, and who wrote it. So that's one thing. But I think what we wanted to focus on tonight was just the idea of the accusations that are made from the Mormon camp about the Book of Mormon. And so I think if we focus first on where it says, you quoted a couple of great things, let's go to the Book of Mormon, and we'll see what it says in the Book of Mormon. So we have, if you turn to 1 Nephi 13, it says something that's quite astonishing. It says, 1 Nephi 13:26, I think we have a graphic for this. "And after they go forth by the hand of the 12 apostles of the Lamb from the Jews unto the Gentiles, thou seest the formation of the great and abominable church." Remember that phrase? Mm-hmm. Great and abominable church, "which is most abominable above all other churches, for behold, they have taken away from the gospel of the Lamb many parts, which are plain and most precious, and also many covenants of the Lord they have taken away. And all this have they done that they might pervert the right ways of the Lord, that they might blind the eyes and harden the hearts of the children of men." So in that particular
That's quite
section,
a charge.
It's really quite a charge, because it says that plain and precious parts and truths have just been cut out, basically. They've just been taken out, just completely dropped and erased from what's going on. And then what you'd mentioned before comes from Article 8 of the Articles of Faith. And that basically just says that we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it's translated correctly. Mm-hmm. So it looks as though we have two issues. We have the issue about, did things actually get cut out and removed, plain and precious parts, lots of them, by the Great and Abominable Church? And what about the translation issues? Is it the translation from the ancient language into English corrupted? So I think that's the two issues we've got.
So who did all this tampering with the Bible that they claim happened?
Well, if you take what you see in 1 Nephi 13, they say it's the great and abominable church. It says it's what rose up after the 12 apostles. And then when you read what the leaders of the church have said, they put most of their blame in the very early history right after the last apostles who walked with Jesus died. So there's that whole section of time after them, and that which they call the great and abominable church. So at that point, the last apostle dies. There's a period of time where the church, according to the LDS Church, loses its authority, and as a result, huge chunks of plain and precious truth are taken out. So it's that immediate time right after the death of the last
The death
apostle.
of the last apostles. So we have two issues here, and we want to cover both of them.
Right.
So which one do you want to start with, the plain and precious things or the bad translation?
Well, let's do translation. That's easier. And in fact, that's the issue that has been. I mean, the academics have just shut this whole discussion down. I haven't heard anything good said from the Mormon camp, so that's been a shutout. So let's talk about that first.
Now, it's listed as very prominently in their articles of faith.
It's still there.
Insofar,
it's hard when you see what we're going to talk about. It's hard to understand why.
Have they ever shown us where those bad translations
No, and that's
at?
the thing. We have so many of the original Greek and Hebrew documents that go back for centuries and centuries, I mean, millennia in some cases. So call that raw material. That's the raw material of the original language. Someone should be able to take that language in the Greek and the Aramaic and the Hebrew and then take it across to what we use our English translation to say today and say, aha, look at that. Some nasty guy translated that word improperly over here. But I've never yet seen any Mormon from any camp say, we found the translation errors. This was deliberately mistranslated to misrepresent and misdirect people. There's just nothing there. And when you have a mountain of original language to do it from, you'd think they'd be able to point to something. But nothing's ever been pointed out. It's, I mean, the linguists will talk about, they'll wrestle over the best English word to use. But if you did a deliberate mistranslation where yes became no and good became bad, someone would raise their hand and say, look, I've got the original documents, I've got the English, you guys are doing it wrong, you're misdirecting us. Yet I've never seen anyone bring that up.
And didn't Joseph Smith, now when he decided that he was going to make his precious translation of the Bible, didn't he just kind of comb through it, and did he find any of these translation errors and
that's
fix
a
them?
great point, because he went through and he edited the Bible theoretically to fix those errors. So so why it is, you can look at all this and try and figure out why it is that that the translations are wrong because Joseph Smith took a look at it. I don't get. I mean, that actually should be the end of the whole translation debate, because Joseph Smith went through and checked out the King James Bible, which probably had translation errors according to their claim, and he should have fixed them. So shouldn't that now be the end? In fact, I've had Mormon missionaries come to my house on several occasions. I'm going to move my mic here for a second because they say it's not working quite right. And when I've had them come over to the house, I've asked them, I said, well, you guys use the King James Version, right? And they say, yeah, we use the King James Version. I said, well, why don't you use Joseph Smith's version, the JST, the Inspired Version? Because that's, by definition, sorry about all the noise here, that by definition is a better translation. So why don't you use that? All the errors have been corrected in it. And noise. And usually what they tell me immediately is, well, it wasn't finished.
Oh, but it was.
But it was finished. And in fact, the RLDS Church, which is now, Community of Christ, they call themselves, they publish it. I've got a copy in my office. So it's there. I mean, all the discussion about whether translation is wrong should be gone now, because theoretically, the prophet, Joseph Smith, fixed it all. But still, it's in Article 8,
And it's still there.
as much as it's translated.
Just like 132 is still in the book.
It's still there, and that shouldn't be there either. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move away from the deliberate sabotage, from the mistranslation to perhaps the deliberate sabotage. Did this great and abominable church actually take a razor blade in the early centuries and just start cutting away and take out these plain and precious truths?
Well, let's split it for a second. The Bible is actually two big sections. Everyone knows this, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Let's talk about the Old, because you have to talk two different arguments based on the two sections of it, how they came to us and how possibly sections could have been taken out in that sense. So let's start with the Old Testament. Most people don't understand that the Jewish community from generations long past consider themselves the heartfelt caretakers of the Old Testament.
That's true.
And over the centuries, they've developed an interesting strategy. What they want to do to make sure that totally accurate copies are carried forward was they instituted a very rigorous, like a crazy rigorous technique to be able to do the copies, how many words you can put on a page, what the columns are, and even a pretty advanced and very mundane and exhaustive error checking technique. And they've done this for centuries. And when they would finish a perfect copy based on those techniques, they take the old copies and so that they would protect people in the future from being misled by copies where the ink might fall off or something like that, they would destroy the old ones. So it turns out old copies of the Old Testament we don't have, but the new copies that keep getting pushed forward are incredibly error checked. In fact, there's a technique that we use in the internet that you use on your phone today and you don't even know it, called cyclic redundancy check and checksums, where you add up all the numbers, the data streams. That's what the Jews would do when they would check. They would take the Bible when they finish a translation, and they would count to find the middle word in the Bible. If it wasn't the same as the middle word in the original text, they'd throw this one away. They'd check to find out where the middle letter was and count their way in. They'd count how many sentences had all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet in it and make note of it. So they had these error checking techniques that when they would get finished with a copy, they'd say, we've done all the error checking, this one's exactly right, and they destroy the old one. So carrying forward on the Bible from the Old Testament has been a passion of theirs for generations, and so you can almost guarantee that what they've carried forward in the copies is nearly perfect.
Okay. And again, I like to mention, God said it, He can do it. I mean, He can control what people do or don't do. And all this sounds so good of what you've just explained to us, but couldn't the first century church have tampered with the text of the Old Testament at that time, and then maybe from that point forward it be transmitted correctly?
Impossible. It's impossible.
How can it be impossible?
Three words: Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls did something astonishing for us to be able to check how well this process has gone on. If you'd asked me this question before 1947, I'd have to say, well, you know, the oldest Hebrew Bible we have was written in the 900s AD. I mean, who can tell whether it's been transmitted right? 900s AD. And it was a great copy. In fact, here's a picture of the Aleppo Codex, which was the best one at the time. That's from Joshua in 1:1. And it turns out that's Aleppo Codex. In 1947 and prior, that would have been your best copy of what the Old Testament said. And but that's 900 AD. That's 9 centuries after Jesus. That's a lot of centuries after Moses. I mean, who knows, right? So then, 1947, they find these scrolls in these caves in Israel near the Dead Sea, which is why they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they find them, and they find out that in that collection there are copies of every book, well, portions and sometimes whole copies of every book of the Bible except for one, Old Testament. And so they said, this is incredible. In fact, the earliest ones in that collection date back to 150 BC. So now we've got a scientific test. Let's take our Aleppo Codex, copied in 900 AD. Let's take parts of what comes out of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 150 BC, and we have a 1,000-year test to see how they did on this, what I claim, a very rigorous copying regimen carrying forward. And they looked at it and found out that virtually it's unchanged. In fact, the entire book of Isaiah is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They went through and counted it word by word. 95% of Isaiah is exactly the same. And the 5% that's different are slight slips of the pen, slight changes in small words. It's almost nothing. So it has nothing to do with the content. 1,000 years.
Wow. Wow.
1,000 years. So,
wow, that's amazing.
So whether the early church, the great and abominable church itself, changed the Old Testament in the times of Jesus doesn't make any difference, because we jumped over the time of Jesus to 150 years before, and it didn't get changed. So the Old Testament case is kind of closed.
So no one could possibly have tampered with an authorized copy and it not be found out.
No, and see, that's the thing. You saw a picture of the Aleppo Codex. If someone had gone in there with a razor blade and scraped all that stuff out, or cut big holes out of it, or took chapters, I mean, you'd be able to tell. And the copyists, or the Jewish copyists, would look at that and say, wait a second, something's wrong with this text. Well, we're going to throw this away. It's been tampered with. It's been cut out. Because they caretaked and very, very carefully watch it. But there's actually a much bigger issue than having your tampering being found out, it turns out.
And what's that?
Well, they wouldn't have had opportunity to do it. And here's the problem. In first century, you got to think about this. Around 64, 65, 66 AD, the first Jewish war started off with Rome, between the Jews and the Romans. It ended in 70 AD when Titus came in, and he took over Jerusalem and took down the temple and stuff like that. Well, about that time, the Jews in town were saying, we got to pack up and get out of here. And the people who were in charge of taking care of their holy scriptures, the rolls, they said, we got to take care of these. So the first thing they did when the Jewish-Roman War, the first one broke out, they said, let's collect these things together and leave town. Well, that was 68, 69, 70 AD. That's before the last apostle dies. That's before the great and abominable church would have risen up. All those copies of the Old Testament kind of went whoosh and took off. On top of that, there weren't many Christians in town to do it anyway, because about 5 years earlier, Nero, who had Rome burned, blamed it on the Christians. Officially, Christian persecution started about 5 years before the first Jewish-Roman War, And so a lot of the Christians were out of town. They were gone. So they're scattered. The Christians are scattered all over the place. Shortly after that, all the Jews collect up all the scriptures, and they're out of there. Now, at that point, if the great and abominable church wants to find a single manuscript that they can cut things out of and be influential, they can't find them. Everyone's scattered. So the opportunity's gone.
So even if they wanted to hunt and search him down to do it specifically, they wouldn't have been able to do it.
Couldn't do it.
So that's the Old Testament.
That's
Let's
the Old
move
Testament.
on to the New Testament. And how accurate is that?
Well, let's start with Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, what's that got to
Pearl
do
Harbor.
with it?
Pearl Harbor. Let's put this picture. This is a great picture. This is an actual picture taken from a wing camera from one of the Japanese attack planes. You can see a torpedo going off on the far side of Ford Island right there. I bring this up because we just last month celebrated the 70th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. 70 years last month.
Wow.
And remember the 70 years, because that's really important for what I'm going to say in a second here. But let's say for a second, we'll do a social experiment. Let's say what I wanted to do was publish a book where I eradicated the plain and precious truths about the attack on Pearl Harbor. Let's say, for instance, I write a book and I say, well, it wasn't a sneak attack by the Japanese. It was, the Americans fired the first shot for number one. And I could say, not only that, but it wasn't a sneak attack. I could even say that USS Arizona, which you can go to today, which is sunk down in the harbor right there. I could say in this book that I write, when I take out these plain and precious truths, that the Arizona wasn't sunk during the attack. It just kind of developed a hole in its hull later in the years, and it just sunk to the bottom. And they never. I mean, I could write a book about all this stuff. The question is, could I get away with that account?
No way.
And why?
No way.
Why couldn't I?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why you couldn't. There's people that have written journals, they've written diaries, there's eyewitness accounts, there's stories that fathers told their sons of the events that took place on that day. There's no way.
It's too fresh.
Yeah.
I mean, for all of us sitting here, we'd say, that's crazy.
Yeah.
You couldn't sell that book in 2012 right now at all. Just couldn't do it.
Well, there might be a few weirdos that buy it.
Conspiracy theories and stuff.
You're right.
But the oral histories are still very, very strong. I mean, a lot of us have never gotten books and researched Pearl Harbor, but from the oral histories that have been passed on over the last 7 decades, we know what happened. I showed you a picture of what happened. So
Right.
you just couldn't get away with it. But let's take it a little bit more. During that time, there were mountains and mountains of written accounts of what happened. I mean, it went through all the news wires. Every newspaper in the United States had them. There was no place you could be in the United States or around the world where you couldn't find a newspaper that would tell you what happened. You know, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, December 7th, Sunday morning. I mean, it would be there. So you have this gigantic collection of accounts. That would be a tremendous problem. But let's just keep the experiment going. Let's say I actually succeeded in writing that book with all these plain and precious truths kind of mangled and stuff like that. Now let's go out, say 200 years from now, and a historian tries to find out what really happened at Pearl Harbor, and he comes upon my book, and he reads it, and he reads a lot of other stuff too. What's he going to think of my book?
He's going to say it's nonsense and hogwash.
Right. Primarily because it's one voice in the midst of hundreds of thousands of written voices spread out all over the country and all over the world.
That agree with each other, and yours doesn't agree.
And someone has said that history is really coming to an understanding of the past through witnesses, And so here we would have my witness account, which says one thing, and thousands of others that say pretty much the same thing, saying it different ways, but the content would be the same. So
exactly.
I would be laughed out. In fact, if I wanted to succeed, and here's the point, if I wanted to succeed in hoodwinking all the historians from this part out by pulling out those plain and precious truths, I would have to go around and collect up every one of those articles that was ever written and collect them together, take them out of circulation so no one could see them, so that 100 years and 200 years and 1,000 years from now, the only thing anyone would read would be my stupid account.
Your account.
But you know, we can't collect them. We can't collect those all up. So that's the problem with being able to rewrite history in this kind of a fashion. When you have that many accounts out there, I can't change them all. There's too many out there to counteract with just one action.
So this is the situation with the New Testament then, with the
you can see this coming.
manuscripts.
And that's what happened when you come into the New Testament. It's different from the Old Testament because unlike the Old Testament, it didn't have a centralized, skillful set of scribes who were copying it. Instead, I mean, Paul writes a letter in the 50s. You know, he starts writing his letters in the early 50s, mid 50s, late 50s, early 60s. He's writing his letters to Corinth and Galatia and all those kinds of places. And he's writing these without any specific instructions like, well, boys, when you finish reading this, you know, take it to the Central Correlation Center where we'll copy it and send it out. No, that didn't happen. But churches around the area were very enthusiastic about Paul's letters in the 50s and 60s. And so they said, we need copies of these. So people just started copying like maniacs. And they're being careful. They're also not as rigorous as the Jewish scribes, but they're doing a pretty good job. But the issue is they're making hundreds and thousands
of copies
of Paul's letters. So Paul sends a simple letter to Rome that we call Romans. It gets copied who knows how many times and spread out all over the Mediterranean area. We can't fix that. We can't change that even if we wanted to. So yeah, that's the same thing. And we know for a fact when you get to 100 AD, now just 100 AD, we know for a fact that all of Paul's letters have been collected together and copies have been in strong circulation by 100 AD.
That's right.
All 4 Gospels, as we know them today, were copied and were in strong circulation by 100 AD. And I mention 100 AD because 100 AD is exactly 70 years after the death of Jesus. So the same problems I would have right now trying to change the precious truths about Pearl Harbor, by 100 AD, it would be impossible.
It's still too fresh. It's still too fresh for them to get by with that.
It's still too fresh. It'd be virtually impossible.
But what about the phony Gospels? Couldn't some of these phony Gospels be written around the 1st century, the 100 AD? Well,
they could have. We have some of them. The Gospel of Thomas is one of them. Although the copy we have isn't 100 AD, it's somewhere around 300 or 350 AD. But because we have so many other, again, witness voices about what the Gospels were about, who Jesus was, you look at the Gospel of Thomas, the one voice, and you compare it against the thousands of voices of manuscripts we have, and we say, well, this Gospel of Thomas, I don't know. It's like going on the witness stand in court, saying, well, I don't know. You're one voice, but thousands of others say something else. In fact, what most people don't know is that the Bible, the New Testament, has more documentary evidence than any book on earth.
That's right.
On earth. I think the closest is Homer's Iliad. Homer's Iliad has about 600 ancient Greek copies that we can read from. Plato only has 10. Did you know that all we know about Plato comes from 10 Greek copies we have? Homer's Iliad about 600. The New Testament has roughly 5,000 Greek manuscripts, and those Greek manuscripts in the early couple of centuries were also translated into other languages like Coptic for Egypt, Syriac for Syria, Roman, Latin, and they got copied into other languages, translated, and then sent out into huge geographic areas. So the same thing happened as in Pearl Harbor. This stuff got copied, copies, other languages, sent out all over the place. You can't collect them back up. It's like it exploded.
Right. There's no way you can collect them all.
There's no way you can collect them back up. You can't get all the copies back from Egypt, and all the copies back from Syria, and all the copies back from, wherever they went, from Ephesus. They're everywhere. So trying to clean those up is a big problem. And as a result, we have so many of those documents that say pretty much the same thing. We can spot the phonies really easily because, like my book, spot the phony. It's easy. It's one voice amidst thousands that say pretty much the same.
But some of the New Testament documents are not in agreement. Wouldn't this kind of fall right into their thinking that the New Testament isn't reliable?
And let's be realistic. Your email writer was right. It's copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of. There will be some errors that creep into that, but those little errors, to date, none of them are doctrinally influential. They have nothing to do with doctrine. They're usually small kinds of things, but they are extraordinarily useful in terms of tracking where this copy came from. Because if this guy today slipped his pen and wrote something slightly wrong, misspelled someone's name, for instance, and that copy went on, the copies from him, we would know it came from him. So these little glitches or little hiccups, I call them, that are part of these tiny translation differences gives us an extraordinarily powerful way to track whose copy came from who. And it gives us an even stronger case to know where these things came from. And so those are actually, they're wonderful. They allow us to track the family tree of the copies of the New Testament.
That was one of the things that impressed me when I, as a new Christian, first starting to study the Bible. There would be a footnote there that said, well, this copy uses this word, and that might be an alternate translation there, but it never changed the meaning of the passage. And I thought, oh, I can check it out. It gives me the opportunity to check it out.
That's right.
So the people who claimed that the Bible was mistranslated never studied the Bible themselves.
They never looked very closely.
They sure didn't.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the charge that passages have been edited, altered, reshaped, and rewritten to fit someone else's preconceived idea or motive cannot possibly be true.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. And we can say a couple more things after that when we come back from the break. But it's pretty much I'll just say this, it's almost a social impossibility to have changed what was written to such a degree that we would not be able to detect
that we wouldn't
plain and
know
precious
about
things are gone.
That we wouldn't know. We would know what they
when
were.
Small misspellings happen.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're ready to open up our telephone lines now. Our number is 801-973-8820. 8820 is TV20. Give us a call. Stay on topic. And right now we have a message we'd like to share with you.
You are watching Polygamy, What Love Is This? Broadcasting live from Salt Lake City, Utah. This program is the broadcast outreach of a Shield and Refuge ministry. Shield and Refuge is a point of first contact for Mormon fundamentalists who question the doctrines of the religion or who are actively seeking for an opportunity to escape the polygamist lifestyle. Examining the claims of fundamentalist doctrine against the backdrop of biblical truth is central to our efforts. We invite you to contact us. Call toll-free at 877-425-9993 or email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. You are welcome to join us in our monthly support group, Life After Polygamy, where you can meet others like yourself who are searching for answers about polygamy and Mormon fundamentalism. We meet monthly in the Salt Lake City area. For more details about time and place, call us toll-free at 877-425-9993 or email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. We want you to know that we've made available to you some outstanding resources free of charge. You will find them at our website, www.whatloveisthis.tv. There you will find the DVD, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy, which documents the real-life stories told firsthand of those who were lifted out of the culture of polygamy through the power and love of Jesus Christ. Also, free of charge to you is the booklet, Is Polygamy Biblical? It explores plural marriage in the context of God's Word and answers questions like, did God ever command polygamy? Is it part of God's plan? While you are at our website, make sure to take advantage of the archived episodes of this program, which can stream on demand directly to your computer. There are more than 100 shows to choose from. And if someone you know is unable to view this program via live broadcast, recommend that they visit this same website every Thursday at 8 p.m. Mountain Time to watch this show through live streaming video. Simply follow the links to the live streaming video page. If you are watching live tonight, we invite you to call us as we open our phone lines. The number is 801-973-TV20. That's 801-973-8820. Now, back to Polygamy, What Love Is This? With our host, Doris Hanson.
Welcome back to our show. This is Polygamy, What Love Is This? I'm Doris Hanson, your host, and our guest is Jim Catlin. We are discussing, pardon me, the reliability of the biblical record, and we've been discussing some very interesting information about how we can know that the Bible is translated correctly and we can trust its contents just like God promised. So our telephone lines are open. We do invite you to join in our conversation here and to weigh in on with your questions or comments. You can telephone 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820, and again, please stay on topic. This is a good topic, and if you've got some input, we'd love to hear from you. So Jim, while we're waiting for the calls to come in, let's go back to what we were talking about, the errors that couldn't be there like people claim. Are there errors in the New Testament? Are there errors there?
Well, error is a strong term to use. There are differences because there's differences in the 5,000 Greek manuscripts, you know, that were informally copied. But again, when you go through and you look at the differences, they're not substantial. They're very small. And like your Bible says, mine says the same thing. You know, they'll put a little flag in a section and say, well, this was not said in the earliest manuscripts. Or actually, that whole strategy started with the King James Bible, because when the King James translators published the King James Bible, they wanted it to be word for word literal. So any word that didn't show up in the original Greek, they would make italicized. And so you know, what, reading the King, oh, well, that's not in the original Greek, but those other words are.
Yeah.
And Joseph Smith, when he decided to translate the Bible, decided to get rid of most of those italicized words to show how smart he was.
Yeah, it messed it up pretty good, didn't it?
Yeah.
And you know, there have been, since the canon of the Bible has been in place, commentators through the centuries who have quoted the Bible, and they've quoted it extensively. In fact, from what I understand, they could take all the comments that these commentators have done and they clip them all out and put them together, and they can re-put the New Testament together, with the exception of about 10 verses, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Word for word, because they quoted the New Testament so extensively in their writings.
Yeah, I have a note about that here somewhere. I'll get to that later.
And they're quoted correctly according to what our Bible says.
Yeah, someone asked a really smart guy he was a Scottish lord, it turns out, in the 18th century, asked him, said, what would happen if we lost all of the papyruses, all the old Greek documents we have from the 3rd century on, and could we reconstitute the New Testament? He says, well, that's a great challenge, because here on my bookshelf, I've got all the recordings of what the church fathers read in church and what they said. They're called lectionaries. I wonder how much of their quotes I can reconstitute the Bible from. And this is like 1780. He went through and did it and said, oh, you know, I can reconstitute the entire New Testament except for 11 verses.
11 verses.
So that just gives you an idea how widespread this stuff is.
Yeah.
You eradicate a little bit, you still have enough to reconstitute the whole thing. It's astonishing. Yeah.
So what, that'd be interesting to know, what did Joseph Smith fix?
Well,
when he did his, it's not really a translation he did, but when he did his revised version.
He did a lot of fixes.
Yeah.
If you've ever read the JST, or actually if you've got a quad, like I've got a quad right here, it has notes in the bottom to the JST. It has a big chunk of JST stuff in the middle, actually. It has the big section of Genesis 50 added. So you say, oh, this is a great test. We know where there's slight little hiccups, little glitches in the New Testament. I mean, we see them. They're very evident from the thousands of documents we have. I wonder how many of those Joseph fixed.
Yeah.
Zero. He didn't catch a single one of them. He changed a lot of other stuff, but he didn't do that. And let me give you a few examples, because these are. I'll show you how really silly some of them are. Isaiah 5:25 talks about the carcasses being torn in the streets, is what the phrase says. Well, torn is a word that's used in King James, but torn's everyone knows and agrees. That's a bad translation. It's not actually the word torn, it's the word refuse or dung. So the corpses are dung or refuse in the streets, not torn. Well, so when Isaiah 5 is copied into the Book of Mormon in 2 Nephi 15, they copy the wrong translation of the word. And there's not a Hebrew scholar who debates this.
Yeah.
It's the wrong one. You would think that when you get into 2 Nephi, and I can tell you, if 2 Nephi 15 said that the corpses were refuse or they were dung in the streets, I would probably be a Mormon today.
Wow.
Because that's something he should not have been able to know. But he copied the error. There's a couple other errors.
He copied several errors that way, didn't he?
Several errors. And in fact, some of the errors are so specific to the edition of the King James Bible, we can tell exactly which year edition the King James Bible he copied from. And that's the same technique we use to be able to qualify old Greek texts. When you have a lot of them and you got them right in front of you, you can tell where the error crept in. There's a very famous change in 1 John 5, verses 7 and 8, where there's this kind of Trinity thing added in this section. And it doesn't largely change the content. It's not like 1 John 5 says there's no Trinity and this one does. It's not that. It just it supports the case of what's there. We can go back and we can tell you the guy who added that into the Bible. So sure enough, today, you take any modern translation, yours or mine, it'll say, well, some newer manuscripts say this, but the vast majority of the old manuscripts don't. So it was shoved in somewhere around 220 AD, and we sort of know who did it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
How
so
interesting.
it's very clever.
Should close any questions that anybody would have about the veracity of the Bible. Okay, we've got some calls here we'd like to take. One, there's an off-the-air question. If you went back 100 years in the Book of Mormon, then forward to today, would there be major changes? We're going to talk about that next week.
That's a big yes.
Yes, that is a big yes.
That's a big yes.
And Bishop Earl is going to be our guest next week. And he said that what led him out of the Mormon Church was he found those errors from the 1830 Book of Mormon to today's Book of Mormon, and he's coming next week, and we're going to share those errors. So that will answer your question then.
And by the way, it's especially serious because Joseph made a special claim. He said that he translated it word for word, and the word wouldn't go away from his vision until it was written down exactly right.
That's right.
Well, I don't make that claim for the New Testament, but for him, he's got a very high charge to stay up to.
That's exactly right. Good point. Okay, we've got line one, Carl calling from Murray. Hello, Carl.
Yes.
You're on the air. You turn your TV down. Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
This is Carl. I have a question for the pastor with you. I have a lot of friends that are Greek. A lot of them speak Greek still. And I've been told that the Greek Bible has never been translated or added to or taken anything out of. It is still in the original tongue. It has never changed. Is that true?
Well, it depends.
I'll hang up and let him answer.
Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Carl.
it depends on how you say that. We have pieces of Greek New Testament that go back to 125 AD, but they're only of certain portions of the Bible. Now, did that change? Well, all copies from that did slightly change because of copyist errors. But if what you're saying is that original oldest Greek reflective in our new translations, yes, they are. That's one of the problems with the King James. Is that King James, although the academic level of King James was wonderfully high, they really tried hard. Since the time of 1611, we've had so many other manuscript documents come to light that we say, well, these not only support what they came up with, but there's a huge body of them that might say something slightly different or might put it in a different context. So yeah, I think the value among Bible translators is to use the oldest Greek possible and the most witness voices of those Greek. In fact, translators actually call those little pieces of Greek and Hebrew, they call them witnesses. Because that's what they are. They're witnesses.
Right. And I'd like to make mention here that even those slight changes that are evident, they're nothing that have to do with doctrine, with our salvation issues, with the divinity of God, with or Jesus Christ, I should say, being God, and salvation by grace through faith, not by works. And none of those issues are tweaked at all with those questions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if those things did have large changes in doctrine, we would know about it. We have enough critics who say, excuse me, this is not right. Yeah. But they're all very, very benign. I mean, there's another one that happens in John 1:28, talks about the King James says that John will be baptizing in the Jordan out at Bethabara. Well, he was actually baptizing at Bethany. So where's the Bethabara part? Well, that's actually just a translation error. and if you have a newer translation, it'll say Bethany. If you've got the King James, it'll say Bethabara. Does it change my doctrine about the nature of God? No, but it's a very useful glitch in the translation so I can track things. I can track the fact that particular passage goes into 1 Nephi 10:9. And they use the errant King James version.
And they use the wrong.
They didn't fix it. So that's very useful to me.
It is very useful. So. It's very good. All right, line 3, we have Beth calling from West Valley. Hello, Beth.
Hi, Doris. How are you guys?
We're doing
good.
Great. Thank you.
I have a book that might be very helpful to people. I was a Mormon for about 40 years, and that was one of the issues that came up with me is, was the Bible truly the Word of God? And there's a book out by Josh McDowell called New Evidence That Demands the Verdict. And, I mean, this man did years and years and years of massive research. And once you read that, at least in my mind, there was absolutely no doubt of the accuracy of the Bible, that Jesus was, who he said he was, that the crucifixion was real. So, any non-Bible believing people out there, that might be a great book to read.
That's a very good point, Beth.
Great
Thanks
suggestion.
for calling.
It's a great
That's
suggestion.
Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. And if anybody doesn't quite get that, you can email us after the show, and we'll be happy to give you the full title and also the author. But Beth, thank you very much. That's a good suggestion.
Great lead.
Bye-bye.
And I'll add to that too. That's where most people start, because Josh McDowell's done the best job collecting together from so many sources. Another one that's really, really approachable, F.F. Bruce, who's well known, wrote a book called The New Testament Documents. Are they reliable? He published it in 1943, and it's been in perpetual reprint ever since, and it's been updated. It's astonishingly good to take a look at this whole idea about how can you change the history of Pearl Harbor? Impossible. How can you change the history of the New Testament? Impossible. And Bruce does a great job telling you why.
Okay, F.F. Bruce, another
F.F.
one.
Bruce,
Okay.
yeah.
Our phone lines are open, 801-973-TV20. If you'd like to call in, weigh in on this, or if you have questions, we'd love to hear from you. Give us a call. Now, part of the charges that the LDS Church has made, and I want to mention also the polygamous groups believe exactly the same thing. They don't believe the Bible is translated correctly, and they stick with the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants as their material. They've charged that plain and precious parts of the gospel have been removed by the great and abominable church. Would you say what exactly those plain and precious parts are? Do you know? Do you have a clue?
Well, see, this is one of the problems. When I ask that question, I get a lot of hemming and hawing. So I've made my own list.
Okay.
And this list, because in the passage we read in 1 Nephi before, it said that they were covenants. So I'm thinking, okay, so what covenants do I know that are part of the followers of Joseph Smith? What covenants do they do that are not anywhere substantiated in the New Testament? So if that's it, those are the plain and precious truths that are not there, because they're clearly not in the New Testament. So here's a list I made. It's a kind of a quick list. These are the things, maybe, I'm guessing, if you're LDS or you're a fundamentalist and you can know better, let me know. But this is my guess about what the plain and precious parts are. Things like men can become gods, or God's the result of eternal progression, or God's an exalted man who may have sinned himself, or God has a body of flesh and bone. These are all things that are not substantiated in the Bible. The plurality of gods, or that Heavenly Father is united to Heavenly Mothers, maybe. That God created the universe by organizing matter rather than speaking into existence. The 3 degrees of glory as in heaven. That Christ is the same basic spiritual species as all mankind, as you or I in that sense. And you know, you can go on and on. There's everything about the temple is not in the New Testament.
Right.
Eternal celestial marriage, polygamy, part of that whole exaltation. The Melchizedek priesthood. So baptism for the dead. So we could go on and on and on. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe these are the plain and precious parts that they claim got excised out of, you know, the flow of the documents of the Old and New Testament. The problem is they're not in the Book of Mormon either. So is the Book of Mormon the restored gospel in that sense? Can you get closer to God by reading it than any other book? Well, I don't know, because the things that are gone in plain and precious truths, the same robbers who cut them out of the Bible must have cut them out of the Book of Mormon, because they're not there either.
That's true.
So
absolutely true.
It makes me wonder.
Their main doctrines aren't in the book.
So actually, can someone call in and tell us what the plain and precious truths are that they know have been left out, that now have been restored? Because that's my guess, but I don't know. Yeah, and they would have to be restored into the Book of Mormon, because that is the most correct book on the face of the earth, and it was that book that we could get closer to God than any other. Yeah, exactly. Theoretically, so I should have my whole restored gospel straight if I read the Book of Mormon. Right. Also, if you go on in that 1 Nephi passage we started the show with, 1 Nephi 13, when you get down to 35, it tends to imply pretty strongly that these restored truths will come out of the Book of Mormon. Because let me read this for you. See if you disagree. For 1 Nephi 13:35, for behold, saith the Lamb, I will manifest myself unto thy seed, and they shall write many things which I shall minister unto them, which shall be plain and precious. And after thy seed shall be destroyed, that's the seed of the Nephites, presumably, and dwindle in unbelief, and also the seed of thy brethren, that's presumably the Lamanites, behold, these things shall be hid up to come forth unto the Gentiles by the gift and power of the Lamb. That hid up phrase is very specific, usually to the plates that were hidden that Joseph Smith dug up. So, correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who are better Book of Mormon scholars than me, but 1 Nephi 13 sounds like the plain and precious truths will be coming out of the ground after the Nephites and Lamanites go away, the hit up for the Gentiles. Isn't that the Book of Mormon? They're not there.
And they weren't restored in the Joseph Smith translation again.
No,
We go
he
back
didn't
to
add
that.
them to the Bible
They didn't
either.
restore them
Yeah.
either in theirs. 'Cause
So
they're
I'm
not-
confused about the plain and precious truths, and with the guarantee that Joseph Smith, as translator, should have put them back in, and he didn't. I
Yeah,
don't get it.
yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah. Okay, good points. All righty. We have Marcia calling from Ogden. Hello, Marcia.
Good evening. I've been listening to this show, obviously, and I caught the lady's phone call about, just previously, about Josh McDowell's book.
Yes.
And even, she'd been a member of the church longer than I have, and I was a member of the church too, and I'm pretty certain, you might have to correct me, but I'm pretty certain this is another thing that might help people out to read that book. I believe Josh McDowell was an atheist and was a newspaper reporter or something like that, who started out with the intent of disproving the Bible and started looking at all these things and found out that he couldn't, and that's where he came up with how he wrote the book.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's
true.
absolutely
I don't
true.
think he was a newspaper reporter, but he had intended to disprove the Bible by showing that it came from scurry background.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty neat, and so this book is very powerful to the opposite of what he was intending on doing.
Yeah, and it's very comprehensive as well.
Exactly.
Thanks,
Thank
Marcia.
you.
Uh-huh. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, we've got Jill calling from West Valley. Hello, Jill. You need to turn your TV down. Jill?
Yes, it's
You, you need to turn your television down, Jill.
yes. I muted it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. My question is there any other church, other than the Mormon Church, that has rewritten the Bible?
The Jehovah's Witnesses, the New World Translation has.
That's what I was going to say, yeah. Yeah.
They have.
What's the name of the church? The other
The
church?
Jehovah's Witnesses, they wrote the New World Translation. They call it a translation, but it isn't because the guy who did it didn't know Hebrew or Greek.
Yeah.
Just like Joseph Smith. Yeah.
And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I did believe that at the end of the Bible, it does say that it is not to be rewritten or added to or anything that would change what is already there.
Yeah, that line is there in the end of Revelation. I think a lot of people misapply that and think that applies to the entire collection of the Bible because that may not be true. But it does definitely apply to Revelation.
And Joseph Smith changed Revelation.
And he changed it big time. In fact, a friend of mine I know has a copy of the Joseph Smith translation that's written in parallel with the New Testament, left and right. And he just highlights all the things that Joseph Smith changed in Revelation. And he'll say, so like all of these changes right here. So, but, a lot of people would say, well, he was qualified because he was the prophet. But still, the warning is
God
quite
said not
serious.
to.
And if you apply it just to Revelation.
Warning is quite serious. Is the same warning in the Book of Mormon?
Not that I know of.
Now that's
But
a
it
question.
can't be
I'm not
changed?
sure. I don't think so.
Or added to?
Well, that's a good point. I'd like to find out because there has been almost 4,000 changes made to the Book of Mormon. So I'd like to find that one out.
Oh, and I was joking.
Oh.
I'm serious.
Well, but what a lot of people don't know is that Doctrine and Covenants has gone through huge changes, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to your program next week.
Okay, great. Thanks for calling.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, we have Stanley calling from Provo. Hello, Stanley. Hello?
Oh, how are you?
Yeah, you're on the air. Do you want to ask your question or make your comment?
I just wanted I think the scripture is John 17:3. It says scriptures are inspired of God. And if they are inspired by God, then how can somebody say that just because mankind has its own, the word's will, but Mormons use a word, they use a word, the word is, I can't remember what the word is, but it means they have their own will, that
Agency.
they would be allowed to mess up a letter that God has made to man.
They can mess up their own lives, but I don't think they can mess up what God does.
That's right. So that means that if the Bible is a letter from God to man, and that is his book, then he would keep it from being destroyed. See, just like your commentator has said, that there may have been slangs or different interpretations, not interpretations, slangs or different ways of saying things that changed over the centuries. He was perfect because he said he did not change the meaning.
Right.
Right. That's right.
Okay, thank you. You've made some good points, Stanley. We appreciate your call.
Okay.
Good night. Okay, we need to start winding down our conversation here. Is there anything that you want to say? Shall I ask a real quick question? We've
Just
only got
a quick
about
question.
a minute.
We got a minute, yeah.
What about the archaeology about our claim of the Bible's trustworthiness?
Oh, okay. Yeah, the fact that you have cities and names of people in the New Testament and Old Testament that exist is an extraordinary thing. I'll give you one quick example. Way back, for years, it turns out that people said Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate is a predominant figure in the New Testament, and yet he does not exist anywhere in any of Roman history. So Pontius Pilate must not exist. The Bible is crazy. But then in the mid-60s, they found Pontius Pilate's name inscribed on a piece of stone in Caesarea, and they all went, oh, never mind.
Yeah.
So when you get things like that, you go, well, that's really pretty astonishing. In fact, here's a picture of that stone itself. It says Pontius Pilate on it. And I have to add, because this is really relevant here, there's not a single proper name, either a city or a person from the Book of Mormon that shows up anywhere in the world
in the archaeology.
like that. So when you have a document that does that, you have to say, well, maybe it's historical, even if it looks silly with Pontius Pilate, because he really did exist.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'd like to thank you for coming on and sharing this with us. We hope that we've touched some people's hearts to get them to provoke them to kind of check these things out and take the biblical record very seriously, because it is full of information for our souls. And in my closing comments, I'd like to talk about Psalm 119, 152 tells us that God established his statutes, that they would last forever. And Ecclesiastes 3:14 says, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. You know, the people of the Old Testament trusted God when he promised that everything he did and everything he said would last forever. And Jesus told us in John 12:48, there is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my words. That very word which I spoke will condemn him on the last day. So not accepting the words Jesus spoke is equal to rejecting Jesus himself. He said if we reject him, his very words will condemn us. And his words are recorded in the Bible. They were recorded accurately, completely, and faithfully. God watched over and protected the integrity of the translation, of the transmission, and the accurate preservation of his word. You can bank your eternity on that, because God promised he would do it. God has the power to do it, and he did do it. Those who teach that we cannot trust the Bible are rejecting Jesus' promise that his word would never pass away. And rejecting Jesus' word is rejecting Jesus himself. It's a very serious accusation to say that the Bible was not translated correctly. God can be trusted. He has proven faithful to his promises, so you can trust the Bible from cover to cover. God credits righteousness only to those who will put their faith and trust in him. If you're trusting your church, you've got the wrong Savior. That place belongs only to Jesus Christ. So trust him and trust him alone. And like I said, next week Bishop Earl Erskine is our returning guest, and we'll be discussing the changed and missing parts of the Book of Mormon. See you then. Good night.